Well, good day, everybody, and welcome to Rock Apartment Advisors webinar series. We're really quite fortunate today to have Chris Vilcsak from Solution 105 with us. How are you, Chris?
Good, thanks, Jim. How are you today?
Just great. Chris, why don't you tell the good folks out there a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your company?
Sure. My background is working for utilities. I'm a mechanical engineer. I took an MBA. But when deregulation was coming up, I kind of realized that the utility approach was generally not really customer-focused, and ultimately the MBA also kind of got an entrepreneurial spark going for me, and,
right.
And so created Solution 105, and that was 1999, and we've been going strong since. So it's kind of neat. It's a smaller company. We've got 8 people, but we do some pretty amazing stuff. We've got some amazing software as well, and ultimately have saved customers tens of millions of dollars. So,
well, that's doing that. Yeah, no, that's great. I'm sure your customers love it too. And I can say without reservation that Chris and his group, all of Solution 105, are really one of the best in the industry. So we're quite fortunate to have you here today, Chris. We're going to talk about something that's near and dear to a lot of landlords, property managers, homeowners, and that's utility management, and then getting into some more specifics relative to metering, submetering, and of course reporting as a management tool. So maybe you can just talk a little bit about the agenda, what you're going to go through today, and then we'll start up.
Yeah. Okay. So the discussion today, I'm hoping just have a very quick snapshot of our company and give people a sense of what kinds of things we can do, but then get into much more around how this can affect users, both on a construction, so on a new build type site, so developers, but also on existing buildings. And for existing buildings, whether they have submeters in place or not is a pretty big piece as well. So be able to speak to some of those issues, the rent control aspects, and how being able to kind of consider submetering at the front end of that makes some sense. I may pass the baton back to you, Jim, to kind of add some of the details into that side.
Sure.
But being able to talk about things that should be considered really from the main utility supply as well as once it's inside a site. So I'll go through some of that, and then just a really quick piece on procurement and some of the considerations there. Depending on time, we may cut that section out. Certain markets have different options with portfolio or with the procurement. Sorry, the Alberta marketplace, for instance, there are great opportunities for savings through that. If you haven't done anything, or if a site hasn't done anything in Ontario, a little bit less. So it's kind of semi-deregulation that's gone on there, and ultimately, opportunities are a little bit less. So
sure. So
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, you go ahead. Sorry about that.
Yeah. So our company, as I said, was founded in 1999. Really, it started off as a knowledge, helping people understand what they should be doing for deregulation, sorting out billing problems. So as deregulation unrolled, the bills were a mess, and in some cases still continue to be a mess. But really, our core competency at that time was around our data analysis and being able to kind of identify patterns in load and getting better prices for customers. We built a billing engine, so kind of behind the scenes, we've sunk more than $1 million into software development that produces those kinds of results for people, as well as the tracking. And ultimately now submetering and real-time monitoring are becoming one of the biggest areas of growth for our firm. Customers are clamoring for some assistance in getting some of that stuff dealt with. So that's what our company does. Really, any questions that we have, or any questions that a customer has around utilities, we can usually help them, and pretty cost effectively too. The best example, I guess, is when there's a pile of mess in front of somebody dealing with utility issues, and they really don't know how to attack it even necessarily. They just kind of push it across the table to us, and we wrap our arms around it and figure it out for the customer.
Yeah, I think what one of the other things, or what I admire about your company, is that in addition to providing a great service to your clients, you're also thought leaders in this industry, and I think that's very important for our listeners to know. there's a lot of stuff going on in the field of energy management and utilities, and it's always good to deal with people that are sort of ahead of the curve and understand the business. So I think that's great. So let's start off here. Electricity supply options, and what you can tell us about this.
Right on. So ultimately, this is kind of how you get your utility supply coming into your site. We've worked on a couple of projects, especially if it's a larger development where there's multiple locations or multiple buildings on the same block, let's say. If you were able to come in with a single supply from the utility, and then get the meter installed at that point, and then distribute yourself, or kind of sub-distribute yourself from internal to the site,
right.
The main supply costs from utilities can be lower. It depends on which markets you're in, obviously, but it's kind of economies of scale, right? Being able to get a main supply into a larger complex, especially if it's over a 5,000 kVA load, which is several buildings, obviously, more office, retail, kind of mixed-use type of opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Cost savings. We did one example or one test of a location that was being built here in Edmonton, and ultimately the cost savings were almost $1 million a year.
Wow.
Per year. Yeah.
And why is that, Chris? How is it that the cost savings would be so much?
So the way that the utilities organize themselves here is that they will cost out specifically what it costs to have the conduit, the cable, the transformers in place for a site, and if it's that large, and so you're paying for what exactly your cost of service is. So your wires rates, the cost to deliver the power to your location, is actually specific to you and your site. And so it's an interesting kind of approach. The utility, EPCOR, has that rate in place. It offers customers the benefits of having a large site and kind of concentrated load. So that's an interesting opportunity. I don't know that I mean, we certainly haven't looked at that specific situation across the entire country and all of the major centers, but I think it would be very fair to say that having a single point of supply for a large load is going to be less costly per unit than it would be to have multiple loads coming in to your location.
Right.
So the one consideration there, I mean, the utility companies themselves don't really want you to do that. They want to have multiple, the smallest service size they can, and carved up within your site. They love that because they have more money in the ground, and they get a rate of return, a guaranteed rate of return on that money on the wires side. So the regulated charges that we're seeing in most jurisdictions are climbing faster than, in some cases, twice as fast as the normal sort of inflation CPI rate. So
yeah,
a little crazy. Yeah. So there's the first point. The second is a consideration to also look at whether or not you would own the transformer, so you'd be a primary customer, or if the utility would own a transformer and have to maintain it, so that would make you a secondary customer. So there may be some savings available there, much less, and ultimately, most people are not leaning towards owning their own transformer and having it maintained, etc. So another consideration of whether or not you, or how you would kind of bring the main utility supply coming into your location.
Sure, and question then is, I mean, I guess the takeaway is that you really have to be looking at this stuff almost from the the inception of a development or as part of your design discussions, and so would it be fair to say that is this something that your engineers, your GC, I mean, who would it be in a development that would actually look at this particular piece of the development period, or is it something that typically that engineers or GCs look at, or would they actually have to come to a service provider such as yourself and get that sort of consulting in order to do this?
Yeah, I think that some of the GCs would understand it, but of the ones that we've been talking to, not many do. They don't understand that there are different options.
Yeah.
Or the customer has the client, or their client has sort of an understanding of what submetering may or may not offer, or the utility supply may or may not offer, and so direct them in one place. And yet, almost every instance, well, every instance so far that we've been talking to a developer at a site in advance of them actually putting, the cable in the ground or the pipes, water pipes or gas pipes for supply. In almost every case that we get drawn into, we were able to offer a pointed direction and offer savings out of that discussion. Because usually the GC or the engineer doesn't understand or isn't putting that in front of a customer either necessarily to say, hey, here's a way that you can end up saving some money.
Yeah.
So again, a good example, development, strip mall, there's 40, or not even 40, 14 bays, let's say, right? So strip location, commercial, 14 location, or 14 meters, or 1 meter and sub-metered. The cost savings and construction side for natural gas alone are in the range of $100,000.
Wow.
To have 1 main meter and then sub-meter. Like that's actually installing the meters then too.
Wow.
So 1 main meter and installing sub-meters rather than putting an individual meter at each bay. So as a construction cost location or construction cost savings, that's something that should be considered.
Yeah. Well, that's just a great advice and the takeaway right there. Water. You and I were having a chat as we were preparing for this webinar, and we just talked about the importance of water and managing water and metering water and just the cost of water and sewage. And I'm sure you'll agree that this is something that if it's not in the forefront, should be.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that water is going to be kind of this century's oil. I think we were talking about that, both of us agreeing on that point. And the water and sewer rates are going up faster than any of the electricity stuff that we've seen, and even the natural gas side. Water and sewer rates are astronomical and just getting worse. And for multifamily development, water and sewer rates can be even more will be more costly than natural gas, almost certainly, and in some cases challenge the electricity costs as well. So absolutely something to be looking at, right? And again, it's just having a very short. I mean, I'm talking about getting involved in a design team, for instance, for 2 hours, for instance, to say here's what the options should be. Here's what you guys should be pricing out, and here's what the savings may end up looking like. And all of a sudden, they're able to bring that back to their client, or the client is able to direct the GC to say, hey, you have to look at this because I am looking at kind of reducing the cost of construction for a site. So again, water is a longer term viewpoint and just getting worse. So things you can do on savings on water side as well would be pretty smart for any developer.
Right, and we've got here, so don't oversize the incoming water meter, right?
Yeah, just essentially, you're going to be paying the water rates are generally, or the water delivery rates are generally based on the size of meter, what size of line that you've got coming into your location. So don't be looking for this huge, buffer safety factor included in the sizing piece. Look at this. Look at the projects you've already got. Look at what your intents are for water saving initiatives that you've got on your site, and size the meter accordingly.
Right, and then if you're
sorry.
No, you go ahead.
And the multifamily cost impact is just kind of understand that there's going to be different costs for multifamily or commercial. Multifamily rates that we've seen in most cases are higher than what you'd see for the commercial side.
Right. So again, this is something that property managers, developers, landlords in general really have to start paying attention to. And again, yeah, I totally agree. I mean, water will be the next oil, as it were. So, tenant supply options.
So two means now you have kind of power coming into your site.
Yeah.
Multifamily build, you can either have the utility supply or build and construct so that the utility will have meters for each of the individual tenants, or have one main meter and then you distribute internally and sub-meter for those two. So really those are the two options. You can have the utility supply it, or you can sub-meter and carve up the main bill based on the sub-metering that you put in place. Generally, construction costs are higher for utility to be doing the meters because you have to run feeds from a main metering room is usually how they set them up.
Right.
To go up the risers in the building itself, especially if it's a multi or a high-rise construction. And so the cost for the wiring and cable and the rest can become quite substantially higher than if you have one main distribution cable going up to, you know, every floor, every third floor, let's say, and you distribute from there. Much cheaper to do, much cheaper for the initial construction for sure. I think on an overall basis, we did a case study, and for most single family, like an apartment building or a condo building, you're paying about the same. Like the end user is paying about the same for the meter rental, the meter charging, the read-and-bill service for a provider versus the main utility supply. So it's no difference for the tenant, if you will, or the condo owner, but from a construction point of view, it's substantially lower.
Right. Well, obviously, you know, more and more new construction, new builds are introducing submetering, and I know a lot of existing landlords in some of the older buildings are also retrofitting and submetering. So, you know, this good segue. Tell us a little bit more about the benefits of submetering.
Yeah. So ultimately, people are getting to the point now. So you know, the discussion to put submetering in place or not. People are at the point where they are willing to pay for what they use. I don't think that anybody would argue that no, you know, they want to be the, or few would argue that they want to be the, you know, the energy pig, let's say, and use all, you know, use their equipment, have the stereo on, have all the rest of the things going inside their suite, versus the person that's energy conscious and putting in, you know, high efficiency bulbs and you know, is mindful of the energy that they use. So I don't think that there's any argument that people are willing to pay for what they use. They don't want to be billed for the person down the hallway who's
right.
leaving stuff, their lights on, you know, that kind of stuff. So I think it's an accepted practice from that point of view, right? Submetering from that point of view. I think it's also you're also able as a landlord, you're also able to see if you've got submetering in place, then you're in control of getting the data and or are able to see the data and the usage. And I mean, ultimately, you know, you don't want to have a situation where you've got a grow op or somebody that's using inordinate amounts of electricity.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, you're able to see that rather than the utility company, you know, trying to look at it later on and say, wow, this person's using, you know, normal usage might be 600 kilowatt hours in a month, and a user who's using 4,000 kilowatt hours in a month has obviously got something going on there.
Something's going on. Yeah. You and I talked about just having the ability to look at that kind of, you know, information on a daily basis so that you can move quickly and be proactive, as opposed to sort of waiting for your accounts payable person or, you know, somebody in accounting coming into your office saying, geez, you got to take a look at this. Here's 3 months supply, it's 3 months worth of bills, and look at this. And you're like, wow, what's going on? And by that time, I mean, you've just lost a lot of money.
Well, and not just for the individual building and the kind of the main meter, but for the individual suites as well, right?
Right.
You know, having $4,000 or 4,000 kilowatt hours being used in a suite should be sending off alarm bells immediately for the landlord. So you're able to see that really quickly, right?
Sure.
Gives you that kind of insight into what's going on. But really, I mean, the benefit from the tenant's point of view is they're paying for what they use. If they're going to, you know, not be using high efficiency bulbs, they're going to leave lights on, leave stereo bits on, use an electric heater even in their home if they need to, if they're using that, then they're going to be paying for that. So,
you bet.
So that's a good thing. I mean, the efforts towards energy efficiency and people are becoming more mindful. I'm very much an efficiency kind of geek and would love to help people kind of reduce that load or reduce those kinds of usage and costs. Now you're getting the benefit. If you make those efforts, you're getting the benefit if you're being submetered. So
sure. And talk to us about the different the different types of submeters, and as well, do these things have to be certified? I mean, you know, how does that work? How do we know that those meters are accurate, and the kinds of meters that there are out there?
Yeah. So I mean, the first piece here, you can install systems that will be read manually or remotely. So we are doing work at a mall, for instance, where they didn't put remote system in. They have kind of the glass front, the old style. It's electronic meters instead of the dials that are on it, but they're read manually. And so we've built an app that that we give to our users that they go in, they enter the information off of each of the meters, and it checks to see if it's correct. Because often, writing the reading down, you'll have an error or miss a digit or have a decimal point in the wrong space, for instance, and so the app tells you if you've got an error or not. But ultimately, you can do the same thing if you've got it being read remotely. You can see whether or not the usage is in range of what should be there. You can either have pulse signals coming out of a meter or a kind of a continuous flow measurement. So ultimately, how the meter itself is going to send the information out, that varies depending on different systems. And then really, you usually have meters for suites, and then those meters will feed out into a kind of a major or central collection point, and from there, that information is sent out then to the software or the system to be able to read that from the remote system. So whether it's using internet or kind of wireless signal, any of those are available as well. Maybe go to the next slide, Jim. Other things are around the meter certification, and so being able to make sure that the metering system that you're putting in place is Measurement Canada approved. If you're doing billing of utilities, those meters have to be approved for electricity and natural gas. Water meters, I don't think water meters have to have a Measurement Canada seal on them, but they do have to kind of pass the weights and measures tests, and so that's kind of a separate initiative from the federal government, just making sure that customers are not going to be overcharged or billed incorrectly. The other things that you kind of look at from a submetering point of view is that the meter has to be able to be able to work at various ranges of use. So winter gas flow for natural gas meter, for instance, is going to be much different than summertime gas flow. We've seen situations where the metering at the really low ranges, so a summertime usage coming into a site, the meter is not in its accurate range, and so we've suggested in some cases to put in an alternate, and that's even the utility meter, to put in an alternate feed, so it will have kind of a winter use, a high flow meter, okay, or a low flow summertime use. You just switch back and forth one to the other, and then you're making sure that the metering is accurate.
Just sorry, if you don't mind, I'd like to interject. In terms of the Measurement Canada certification, can you just tell us a little bit about what that means, and do they come in and actually certify the meters after so many years?
So the initial install, the meters have to be certified. The follow-up, they're either going to be good for 6 or 8 or 10 years, okay, for electricity meters, let's say. After the first initial install and the certification period is passed, you either take the meter out and you send it back in. So if it's like one of the glass front kind of a socket meter like everybody has at their home, you would take that meter out. You would, or get a group of them. So say you had 200 suites in your site, maybe you'd get 20 new meters. You'd take 20 out. You'd put the new meters in. You'd send the 20 off to be recertified. When they come back, you'd put the next group in. So you kind of cycle through instead of having to buy 200 new meters. That would be one of the options. The other would be to work with your supplier to make sure, or to send all 200, get 200 new ones in, and they would recertify and put their meters back into stock. There are other options as well about doing a sample. So if you've got a large number of meters, you may only take 10% of the meters out, let's say, send those off to be certified. If those meters pass, Measurement Canada can provide recertification for all of the meters on the site. Usually it's not for as long of a period, but that's an option as well. Our company provides those services for tenants that we work for landlords that we work with to be able to kind of manage that process for them, and ultimately make sure that the meters are certified and valid all the time, and when it's time for recertification, to kind of help them out with that.
Great. So it sounds like, it's great that companies such as yours offers that service, but clearly it doesn't sound very onerous, and it only happens sort of after quite a few years. So that's useful to know.
Yeah, it is something that you need to be aware of when you're putting a system in, and different systems are easier or harder to kind of have that done with,
sure,
or have the recertification done. But ultimately, when you're putting a system in, best to ask the company that you're providing the equipment. What is the process? How do we do this? What kind of cost levels am I looking at? Part of the problem is once you're in bed with one supplier, you're kind of at their mercy on what they want to come back to you with for pricing or whatever. And so being able to get something that's a fixing of value or not going to be greater than something down the road would be a smart move to do. We've seen situations where suppliers, once the equipment is in place, wow, trying to get recertification pricing out of them is different than a big battle. So
wow, well, that's important, very important for our listeners to note.
Something to keep in mind, right?
Yeah, and so moving on here. Sorry.
Yeah, the other piece that we're talking about is around how you would zone. So if you're building your system, you want to make sure that you have the ability, if you want to submeter, even if you want to have the opportunity or the option to submeter down the road, that you build and construct with that in mind. So we talk about kind of the zoning that's happening or that happens, not zoning as in planning and development zoning, but the zones of where the water supply is going to be fed to.
Right.
So often, you'll have a suite and you'll have electricity that's running down kind of the demising wall between two suites, and usually you're just kind of carving, that up into both sides. However, for a multifamily suite, for instance, all of the plugs and the servicing that's going in to one suite should be going through one meter, one panel box.
Right.
Right. So that you want to do work on a plug-in. The tenant is in control of that breaker rather than their neighbor.
Sure.
Ultimately,
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So not having common supply points, easier for electricity, harder for water. Usually the kind of mirror image of how construction comes together is there'll be a bathroom, two bathrooms of the adjoining suites will be butting up against each other on the wall, and they'll have one water line, one hot water line, kind of coming up that wall, let's say, and feeding from there into both suites. So it's much harder in that situation to put submetering in place later if you haven't considered that going in. So really you have to be considering how you're feeding the system, and can you have one location and length of pipe, and maybe even put that piece in that offers you the opportunity down the road to put in a water meter and easily put in a water meter that will meter all of the water going into a suite.
So just as a bit of a recap, I mean, whether it's water or electricity, well, a few things. Number one is it's great if you have a good consultant to deal with, such as Solution 105. Number two, we talked about costs and ensuring that when you're dealing with a service provider, that you understand what the costs are. You brought the example of the certification. The other pieces, of course, is just understanding design, and whether it's a new development and you've got services coming in from the city, having one meter as opposed to various different access points into the development. You can save a lot of money there. So all these kinds of things, and I guess what I'm trying to get across is that you really have to do your due diligence, and you have to understand that it's worth it, and it's worth going to people such as yourself that get this business that can really help you out, because the savings, from what I can see, are tremendous, right?
Absolutely, Jim. I mean, ultimately, electricity and utility use and even water and sewer rates are going to be they will be the second largest expense on the expense line item after property tax. And if you're able to do something to the second largest expense item or expense line item and keep money in the landlord's pocket, wow! For 2 hours of time of somebody like myself or from our firm or from other firms to kind of look at the issues in a broader sense and say what really makes the most sense from an ongoing point of view, it's really money well spent, right?
Yeah, and we've got a slide here that says submetering questions, and I have a question for you. If I'm interested, if I want to learn more about this topic, and let's say I'm coming to you from the perspective of a property manager, somebody that has to manage this on a day-to-day basis on behalf of an ownership group or what have you. Where can I go? What are some of the resources that I can go to just educate myself more and just make me a better manager, but also help prepare me to deal with people such as yourself and know where to go and be somewhat conversant on these issues. Any kinds of resources that you can share with us where our listening audience can go to for more information?
Yeah, I think that there are consulting firms that specialize specifically in energy efficiency means. The different suppliers or different equipment suppliers obviously have kind of their point of view on being educated on what can go in place or not at a location. So if you wanted to bring 2 or 3 of them in to talk with your design team and say, here's what would it take to kind of have your system or be ready for your type of system, they can be involved. Obviously, they've got a vested interest in going one direction or another for to buy their system, but ultimately it does give your design team or your management team kind of the opportunity to see that. For our part, we do lunch and learns a lot with design teams, for instance, to say, or development teams to say, here's the kinds of issues that you should be considering, or if you've got existing buildings, here's the kinds of things that you should be looking for. As I said, I think at the very beginning, generally the utility companies are not interested in putting huge efforts into helping their customers save money and pay them less.
Right.
And yet that's absolutely what we do.
Right.
Even in the design side, we've seen consultants oversize equipment or oversize feeds and look at the plug load and say, wow, you need to have a transformer in there of 750 kVA size transformer, because their fees are based either on cost of equipment aspect or the more expensive the system going in, the higher their fee base in many cases, and that's just not. I don't know that anybody does that on purpose, but they can end up pointing to safety factors and say, no, we really should put this kind of system in place. Ouch, that just hurts.
Yeah.
That just hurts builders and developers all the way along, right?
Yeah, you bet. So do your homework.
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh.
Rent control.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, you and I had a great discussion when we were kind of setting up for this around how, if you're considering building a new location or building a new facility, being able to carve out the utility costs because they're so volatile,
right,
can be a huge benefit from avoiding aspects of rent control, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, rent control, just a quick history, and it's obviously different in Alberta, different in a good way, I would say. But in Ontario, we've had rent control in place since 1970. And essentially what that means is that, the province basically says, every year, here's kind of the guideline in terms of how much the landlord can increase the rent. And I think, typically it's CPI, but sometimes it's even lower, 0.8% or something like that. So when you consider how much you can raise your rent versus what the cost of utilities are, there's a bit of a disconnect there. But having said that,
yeah, absolutely, and especially from one year to the next, right? I mean, the natural gas market is a great example. 3-4 years ago, the gas prices were 2 and 3 times as high as they are right now, and so if you didn't have the ability to kind of change your cost structure or have those costs split away from the rent control aspect,
yeah,
you were taking less money. The landlord's putting less money in their pocket because more is being paid out for utilities.
Exactly.
Not a situation, right? I mean, here's a good example. The consumer price index is 20%. The rent control elements or rent values were generally higher, and yet I would suggest that the utility rates were even more volatile than what we're kind of looking at for these rates, right? So, from my point of view, as a builder developer, I would absolutely want to have the utility costs in the tenant's hands in some fashion. You can do that through a submetering piece and have that separated out, not as part of the elements that come under rent control, and get away from that problem, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this is a trend that is strong here in Ontario. There's a lot of retrofitting going on, and even when you consider the initial capital costs of retrofitting it makes sense all day long. And obviously, with new apartment construction, it's a lot easier. And just as a quick lesson in rent control, in 1991, basically legislation was put into effect whereby if you did build a new apartment, it was exempt from any rent control. So basically, what that means is you could charge whatever you want, and there are no guidelines, no arbitrary guidelines that the province could set on a building. So people or landlords that were building then or have built since 1991, they're free and clear. But the vast majority of the product in Ontario is still under the auspices of the province's rent control. But regardless, Chris, I mean, here in Ontario, a lot of retrofitting going on, and on turnover, folks that are moving in, their units are submetered, and so now they're having to be responsible for their own utility costs, and that's a trend that I think is going to continue, and I think it's a good thing, obviously.
I agree. I totally agree. I think it's getting costs into the actual user's hands. Their specific costs is a very positive move. And I look at it from the point of view of for a tenant, if they're able to reduce their usage, they should get the benefit of that, right? Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's a smart move all around, I think.
I think so too. So submetering, read-and-bill. So this is sort of the nitty-gritty of how we actually interact with tenants and how they actually pay. And so maybe you can give us some more insight into this.
Yeah. So ultimately, once the system's installed, the landlord or the equipment provider, most of the equipment providers now will want to kind of have this as one of their options. We don't go to any one specific equipment provider itself. We can take readings and information off of any of them. So if you've got a larger portfolio of product, somebody that's independent is probably a better read-and-bill service provider than somebody that's the actual utility itself or submetering equipment supplier themselves. And ultimately, most of the equipment providers started off as hardware providers alone.
Mm.
And that has been their core competency. Many have tried to get into the billing side, and I don't know. we cut our teeth on that stuff when we first started, and it's really been a huge piece of our core competencies from day one. So yeah, there's some of the differences, I guess, that you'd also see. But ultimately, we get the readings in, especially either remotely or manually. We put them into a template. You can kind of go to the next slide, maybe, Jim. We can create that as a template. We can do it with a pre-bill amount or not. And so if you want to kind of try to flatline or equalize your payments from the tenant, so now you can get 6 checks from them, let's say, which will include a consistent amount for their electricity, and flatten that out. We can do that. Running totals on the bills, messages from the landlord to the tenant. The ability to kind of customize any of those pieces is certainly there. And then once we've got, so now let's say you've got 300 or 400 suites in a building, instead of manually entering all of that stuff into your AR, we can provide you with a flat file that will be uploaded into your Yardi or whichever system you're using to give you the immediate impact coming into your financial system for tracking and reporting for payments, etc. So
yeah, very useful stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the ability for us to even look then at daily usage and patterns like that, and to highlight that for a tenant to say, you know what, you're in the top or the lowest users, the lowest 25% of users within your facility, within your building for a one-bedroom suite. People like to see that, and or, if they're above that average line, hey, here's an incentive to bring your cost down. It has no difference from the landlord's point of view necessarily, because the tenant is going to pay for what they're using. But it signals back into the tenant. It's another touch point for an owner, a landlord, to kind of offer value to their tenant. And those can be differentiating factors. If the tenant believes that the landlord's actually there to help them save money, that's a huge plus. You'll have tenant loyalty, whether they decide to stay in that facility or that building, or to move to another one that the landlord owns and manages. Those are differentiating factors, right? If you feel that you've been treated well as a tenant by a company, you'll search out a site that they will have in wherever you're trying to move to.
Yeah, absolutely.
If possible. Right? Those are strong aspects.
No, agreed, and those are very good points to bring up. Couple questions. Now, I'm sort of putting on my property management hat. I'm really excited about submetering. I come into work and I talk to the asset manager, the owner, and say, look, I want to install some sub-meters. I want to get a program running here. They give me the go-ahead, and off I go to the races. So if you were me, what would you do? And let me give you some options. So option number one, I go out, I source the sub-meters myself from manufacturer. I get them to install it, and then I go out and find some sort of a sub-metering program and actually run it and administer it and manage it myself. So that's option number one. Option number two, I go to a sub-metering manufacturer, and maybe they've got a whole turnkey approach. Not only will they give me the sub-meters, but they'll even, put a program together and they'll run it. Or option three, I come to a consultant and say, what's the best way for me, or what's the best thing for me to do? Any pros and cons, or what should we be considering? Because that's kind of the day-to-day stuff is what the PM is dealing with, and it's what kind of advice would you give somebody when they're going down that road?
Yeah, you know what, I think that I'm all about flexibility, and if you can inject more flexibility into any business arrangement, the better off you are. So if you're a sweat equity kind of guy, you like to put in that effort, Jim, and I know you're a hard worker, so exactly that, you may decide you want to go out and do the sourcing. The piece of advice I would give you, if that's going to be your approach, is make sure that you have, you're getting pricing in from your suppliers, which will include the ability to get those manual or those remote reads off yourself and be able to get that information, that you end up owning the data, that you own that information. It's not the suppliers. Many times the suppliers will want you to go through their kind of central data hub, and so you're paying them on that basis for the service of being able to take that information in. Making sure that you have the ability to get away from that system and have the data being sent to where you want it to go gives you maximum flexibility. If in 2 years down the road you've had some problems with the meters, let's say, or they're they're not as focused on billing as they are on other aspects, let's say, and you want to go to a third-party provider, really difficult if you haven't injected that into the initial supply. So I would give yourself maximum flexibility if you're going to source it yourself. If you're going to go to a sub-metering supplier, or again, go to the sub-metering suppliers for a kind of overall approach, an entire package, make sure that you're including all of the different elements from each of the different suppliers that you want to deal with, so that you're definitely kind of considering apples-to-apples comparisons on both impact to tenants. So what is it going to take? Do I have to, what do I need from an outage point of view? Or we got people that are kind of be in and out of the facility for extended periods of time as the construction goes on, so both the initial construction and on an ongoing basis. How often do you have to come in, or how often is this stuff have to be recertified, for instance, right? What does this recertification cost? What's their process to do that?
Right.
So having those kinds of questions answered up front in writing, and especially if you can get some kind of a commitment from them around capping values around, it won't be more, here's what the cost is right now to have this recertified, it won't be more than CPI increase, in 10 years' time. Those would be good things. It doesn't mean that you're fixing the price at a CPI increase, but it may mean that you have the option to go out and have that recertified from a different shop, let's say.
Sure.
And lastly, if you're going to go through a consultant, I would suggest, there are people that have that kind of view. I'm not an equipment supplier, and so I can tell you, I recommend different equipment based on or for different situations, right? I'm not going to marry you to one specific piece, and if you've got a portfolio, I can take information as an independent. I can take information in from any of the systems and produce your statements and give you one kind of common platform for your billing system, for your tenant, kind of tenant usage management system. And so that is where kind of, again, flexibility, you can choose somebody like me, or you can choose another person that's independent, but you are in control of that, or have that even in-house. Say you want to say, you know what, we are ready to take this in-house. We generally find that it's more the other direction, where people have been doing it internally, they're growing, they're realizing that kind of utility management side is not really their forte, and tenant relationship is, and so are looking for somebody to do that externally.
Sure.
The last of those considerations is around the actual collection. Our focus is not on going after locations where people want us to do all of the collections. Part of the problem that we've seen in certain circumstances is that the person who's doing the utility management doesn't necessarily have the same concern as the landlord does for the tenant relationship. So you don't want to have, the utility company that's going to be doing the, producing a statement, yes, okay, but now they're responsible for collections. Somebody's not been paying, and yet your property management, your PM, your on-site person has been working with the, person. They've been getting the rent paid, but the utility piece is falling behind or whatever. You don't want to have somebody going in there with the heavy hand outside of what that realm might look like, and
right.
and really giving someone else the collection role is can lead to those kinds of situations where you
That's
have
a great
tenants
point.
that are now word gets around really fast, whether it's in the
Sure
laundry
does.
room or the front lobby, or people posting stuff up saying, wow, have you guys been threatened by your utility collector, the bill collector, on stuff that is trivial? Hey, we gotta deal with this, or people just leave, right? Who wants to be threatened? I guess, right?
No, those are great points. At the end of the day, it's all about customer service, and we have to keep that in the forefront. Or at least temper that when we're dealing with cutting costs.
And I think that kind of as a I'm not married to the equipment that's there. So again, if there's something that's going on specific to a tenant, let's say, or specific to a location even, my concern is that your tenant is there and is happy, right? As an independent, that's my concern. My concern is not that I want to sell more meters, or I've got more meters down the road to sell. So, here's the bill. You better pay it right now, or Guido comes out, right?
Right.
So,
yeah. Exactly.
And I hope you don't know anybody named Guido.
Yeah, Guido, pull up a couch from Chicago.
Dang it.
Hey, now,
anyway,
this has been really, really good stuff, and I just looked at my watch. We've probably got about 8 minutes. So I know we've got a few more slides that we want to go through. So let's just sort of forge ahead. So just as long as we're... Yeah, so let's talk about design issues, and then we'll just move forward.
So really, as we were talking about, from a design point of view, if you're in a new construction location or a new build, you want to be thinking about how you will be able to kind of create this design and the overall structure to give you the ability to put meters in place, even if you're not deciding to do that right now, down the road perhaps. So having in suite or the breaker panel that comes into each suite, that's generally the case right now anyway. That's a good practice from an electrical point of view. From a water point of view, usually you'll have a common header that kind of runs up the building, and the design of the suites themselves has the water coming kind of split off that same header. So being able to kind of understand that might not be make the most sense for you if you want to be doing your water charges. And again, with water being a ever-growing and faster increasing cost, we're seeing more and more need for that, I guess, right? Separating out that water and water sewer charge.
Right.
And the heat metering, we've seen units. So in Alberta, for example, they stopped the ability to kind of do the, capture the flow rate of the water going through the fin and tube kind of heating system, baseboard type heating system. They restrict people from doing that as a metering for in-suite heating. But you can end up putting units in place. There's an example of I think it's a Baxi unit that actually provides heating and hot and cold water comes through it, and so you're able to measure the natural gas specific to that suite, and as a result, the tenant is paying for what they're using for heat. Lots of people, live in suites where they don't have a heat metering situation, and so windows are open because they like fresh air, but it's just pumping heat out the window. So
right,
not a good situation.
No.
So yeah, no. So things to consider for kind of the design side, right?
Yeah. So something that's near and dear to my heart: portfolio reporting.
Yeah. Well, you guys deal with so many customers that have got large portfolios, right?
Yeah.
And ultimately, the ability to kind of see where you should be concentrating your efforts,
right,
or are the practices that you should be duplicating at other locations is the key, right? So say you have, we're working with a landlord right now, 75 buildings across North America and Asia. We're able to point them to the best, or the sites using the least energy and the sites using the most energy on a relative basis, usage per square foot, and being able to kind of now say, well, looking at the patterns of usage even and saying where and why is it high, and now really drilling down into focus, right? So capital investment, where is it that you should be putting your dollars around? Do I want to do a low flow install, through the building? Which one should I be concentrating on? Which ones are the worst out of my portfolio? Those kinds of reports are what we're really kind of drilling down to now. So this utility consumption report or UCR on a monthly basis. We can do that on a daily basis for tenants if they want to, if you've got the proper submetering system in place. But ultimately, what we're doing now for this landlord, for instance, is sending the information up, and the reports that we create are being used directly in their corporate social responsibility reporting.
Wow.
So it's a really strong tool. Not only are you looking at reducing the energy cost, usage and cost, but you're able to provide the information out into the community that says, here's what we're doing, here's what our efforts are, here's where our direction is, here's what our usage per suite is, what it's been over the last 5 years, and where our targets are, and now, measure it, create your targets, do your program around what you're going to do for savings, and then measure again, right?
Yeah, I think, what's that old adage, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it.
Yeah, yes, exactly right.
Right?
Exactly.
And I'm just looking at something here that's just, it's scary. I'm looking at all these, acronyms and things like that. Now we've got carbon footprint reports. Whoa. Gee whiz.
That's crazy, right?
Well, it's you know what? It is, I guess, in a sense, but it's a reality. I mean, this is where we're going.
And I think that we're also seeing different groups trying to get ahead of the government. I mean, nobody wants the government to be imposing restrictions and regulations if they can help it. And so many of the kind of forward-looking companies, even though they may not have that as a requirement right now, are saying, you know what, if we put this in place and we do this, we don't, the likelihood, there's less likelihood that the government will force us to do this.
Yeah. Nobody
wants to have their, hand in the fire and ultimately, be told you have to be doing some of this thing. If you can do it and get rid of the government regulation, beautiful. And ultimately, I think that there are more and more companies as well that are realizing, especially for multifamily, where tenants are going to decide which building they're going to go to. If you don't have a green program or an initiative like that, or focus on recycling or composting or energy reduction, and here's some things that we're doing internally, and we're going to actually have a utility, or maybe we end up with an energy efficiency subgroup within the community that we've got of our tenants. People are looking for that stuff.
They are.
Right?
I agree.
They may not access it all the time. They may not be the front leader and the person who uses 100 kilowatt hours versus 600 kilowatt hours in a month. But by golly, if they've got the option and that's an important piece for them, they're all over it. So again, I
agree with you, whether it's commercial or residential.
From a landlord's point of view, if you can provide those kinds of pieces into your mix, into your tenant mix, wow, you have tenants for life, right? That's a pretty strong indicator, right?
It's absolutely a powerful tool when it comes to tenant retention. So insofar as the next series of slides, what I'm going to have to do here is I'm just going to keep you to sort of bullet points for each slide, and let's get through them all, because this is all very important stuff. So example, UCR report. What are the two things you want to tell us on this?
This one is just kind of sorted by consumption kilowatt hours per square foot per year. We've had to white out, obviously this is like real data, we've had to white out the location, etc. But ultimately, you're able to see which of the best practice, the guys that are at the top end of this graph are the lowest users of energy in your portfolio.
So
what are they doing, why are they getting there, and being able to kind of report that. The water, this one's actually done by percent change year over year. So the top site has actually reduced their usage from last year to this year the most, or 2011 to 2010, the most. So ultimately, now you're able to say these are the sites where the trend is the right direction. So if you want to reward some of your operators or some of the people that are at the locations for their efforts, this type of thing is a great aspect, right?
Yeah.
Budget creation monitoring, a large part of what we're doing now, I mean, our work used to be kind of 80% was on a one, project by project basis for clients. Now it's probably 80% is on an ongoing monthly fee and we'll give you this list of services, and people are all over that. There's so much, and certain markets are a little bit different perhaps, but there's so much movement of personnel right now, and people poaching good property managers or good operators. If you as a landlord or an owner can provide your staff with tools, and really what we're talking about here are just tools where somebody else is able to do the work, outsourcing a bit, creating budgets and then monitoring against those budgets. I mean, we see people and landlords saying, yeah, you know what, our guys are all over having you at the table because they're able to find a report and information, the answer that they're looking for immediately, rather than having to spend hours or, missing supper with the family again, trying to do work. Rather than that, they have us in place and we're able to do that for them.
Sure. No, that's a very valuable
really
service.
Sorry, what's that?
I said that's a very valuable service that you can provide.
Yeah, I mean, that's where our focus is, right? The tools and the systems we have in place. For the most part, people could create them themselves. I don't know that they would have all of the accuracy. Well, they wouldn't have the accuracy on some of the modeling work that we do for sure. But the time and effort to do that, and then the time and effort to just put the data in and kind of start to go through the reports to find out where are the outliers. That's important. We act as this tool, if you will, and we, on our monthly report base, for instance, we'll tap the shoulder of the operator at a location where something's going sideways on the energy side and say, hey, it looks like something's happened on this basis, and we'll often come up with a recommendation that points the operator directly to where the problem is.
Right.
So very much kind of as a tool, one of the tools that the operators have available to them. The last one here is kind of real-time monitoring alarming. We've got a system installed at a location, or systems installed at locations that pulse or send information out on an ongoing basis. So every 15 minutes we're getting the real-time data push coming out. And so if you want to make changes in your facility and see the impact, you don't have to wait a month or two.
See it right away.
An hour later and see what the difference is. I'm not sure that procurement really makes sense for us to go through.
Right.
Honestly, Jim, I mean, it's an issue. We help people with procurement issues.
Right.
Different types of contracts, different types of risks that they would end up being involved with. But ultimately, that's pretty specialized markets that have that kind of in place.
Sure, but it's expertise that you bring to the table, and you can help your clients.
Absolutely, Alberta is part of that. Not as much so Ontario, and yet it's the ongoing kind of reporting, gather the information and report on what that is, and really drill down to best practice, worst performance, and then kind of where should we spend our capital dollars that we're helping the majority of our clients right now.
So why don't we let's end it here on some of your conclusions, and maybe you can give us sort of a wrap up of all the great information that you've provided us with here today.
All right. So if you're in the process, if you're a developer, you're looking at creating a new facility or a new building, being able to bring somebody like ourselves or have your engineers or your consultants point directly to what makes sense from a submetering point of view is step one. Being able to, even if you're not going to put submeters in as we speak, being able to do it later on again. So designing and building your facility to allow that for later inclusion can be important. And for sure, it's cheaper to put it in place while you're building rather than look at putting it in later. So there's one major piece, I guess. Existing construction, submetering can be done depending on the layout. Electrical more often than water. Water submetering is harder to install after the fact, after something's been built. So that might not be something to be looking to. And ultimately, having flexibility. So putting in place arrangements with your supplier and your equipment, so that you, as landlord, as owner, have maximum control over who you want to do that building. Whether you want to do it yourself, get access to data, putting those types of considerations into place from the supplier is important at the start.
Chris? Sorry, go on. No, keep going, please.
Oh, that's it.
Is that it?
And so now we're at the question point. Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, Chris, I guess I just a couple comments. I mean, first of all, it's pretty clear to me that you know what you're talking about. Solution 105 as an organization is clearly sort of in the forefront of the energy management business, for lack of a better term. And I just encourage people that are listening today to feel free to either give you a call, look your organization up on the web, and maybe you can just tell us what is your web address?
Yeah, so it's www.solution105.com.
Great. And if anybody has any questions, obviously they can feel free to give you a call, and I'm sure you'll be more than happy to answer their questions and provide them with any information that they may require.
Yeah, absolutely, Jim.
Yep, go on.
It is an issue where we're sensitive to what it is that the owner and landlord has to deal with from a tenant point of view, and I think that's probably one of our the comment that we get back most from our clients, right? You guys really help us out. Yes, the tools are there and the expertise is there, yes, but we're conscious of what it is that the owner is trying to do and the relationships that they're trying to create with their tenants, and I think that's a huge piece.
It certainly is. Chris Vilcsak of Solution 105. It's been a great pleasure. I'm hoping we can have you on again, because this is such a huge topic, and 45 minutes, 50 minutes really just doesn't give it enough. It's just not enough time. There's just a lot of areas we can go to, and I think the procurement piece would have been a good one to spend a little more time in, because people that listen to these webinars own properties across the country and even in the U.S. So this is just good information. But I really appreciate your time, and once again I encourage our listening audience to visit your website to learn more about what it is that Solution 105 does, and I can honestly say that Chris and his team know what they're doing, and they provide an excellent service, and once again they are thought leaders in the industry, and we're really happy to have you. So thank you once again, Chris. It's been great.
Thank you very much, Jim.
Yeah, and ladies and gentlemen, we're going to end off here today. We will double up with the sales reporting and sales transactions reporting next month, but I think you'll agree that the topic today deserved the entire time allotment. So we thank you so much. Have an awesome day, and we look forward to having you join us next time. Thanks.